When I opened my eyes again, I was alone in the hospital room. No flowers, no get-well cards, not even a message on my phone. Just the steady beep of machines reminding me I was still alive. The last thing I remembered before collapsing was Lisa holding my hand, swearing she'd never leave my side. But she wasn't there when I woke up, not the next day, not the next week. And when I finally had enough strength to check her social media, the first photo I saw was of her on a beach, smiling in someone else's arms. His hand was around her waist. The caption read, "Some people are just meant to find their way back." That man was Stephen. Her first love. The one she told me was ancient history. The one she said had broken her heart so badly she could never trust again. The one she swore she'd never forgive. And now she was kissing him in broad daylight while I was stuck in a hospital bed with tubes in my arms and a hole in my chest. Gripped my phone so hard I nearly cracked the screen. My chest burned, not from the surgery but from something far worse. Betrayal. I didn't even know what hurt more anymore. The infection that nearly killed me or the woman who left me to die alone. The nurse came in and said softly, "Mr. George, your vitals are spiking. Are you in pain?" I smiled bitterly. "Yeah, but not the kind you can fix with meds." Later that night, I scrolled further down her page. There were more photos. A bath, dinner, a yacht, matching bracelets. The kind of things we had talked about doing once I recovered. The kind of things I worked overtime for so she wouldn't have to lift a finger. But she didn't wait. The moment I got sick, she ran back to him. No explanation, no goodbye. Just vanished. That night, I made a promise to myself. I was going to get better, not for her, but for me. And when I did, I'd make sure she'd regret every second she spent in another man's arms. Even if I had to marry the one woman she could never stand, Stephen's ex, Florence. My name is George. I used to think I was one of the lucky ones. While most people were still chasing hookups and swiping through dating apps, I had Lisa. She was everything a man could ask for. Smart, elegant, the kind of woman who didn't just turn heads, she turned lives around. When we first met, she had this distant look in her eyes like she was always guarding something. I didn't push. I just listened, showed up, stayed patient. And over time, she let me in. She told me about Stephen. Her first love, the man who broke her so badly. She didn't believe in relationships anymore. I still remember the way her voice cracked when she said, "He made me feel like I wasn't enough." That night, I held her as she cried herself to sleep. And I made a silent vow. I would never let her feel like that again. We weren't flashy. We didn't post about each other every day. But we had something real. Or so I thought. I did everything to make her life easier. I'd pick her up after work, drop off lunch if she forgot, surprise her with little notes in her purse. Once, she casually mentioned she liked a rare perfume she'd smelled once abroad. I spent 2 weeks hunting it down just to see her smile when she opened the box. She looked at me and whispered, "George, you always know what I need." I thought we were building a future. We'd even gone to see a few apartments together, debated about kitchen tiles, talked about how many kids we'd want. She wanted a girl, said she'd name her after her grandmother. Then came the fever. At first, it was nothing. I brushed it off, kept going to work, kept bringing her coffee in the mornings, kept smiling. But the fever didn't break. It got worse. I collapsed in the kitchen one evening, and the next thing I knew, I was in the ER. Tubes down my throat, Lisa crying beside me. Or maybe that part was just a dream, because after that, everything turned cold. The calls stopped. The visits slowed. She claimed she was busy with work, that hospitals made her anxious, that she'd see me soon. I believed her. I defended her to everyone. My parents, my friends, even the nurses who started noticing how she never showed up anymore. Maybe she's just scared, I told myself. People deal with trauma differently. But deep down, I knew something had changed. The day I was transferred from ICU to a regular room, I waited. I asked the nurse to leave the door open, just in case she came. Every footstep made me sit up, thinking maybe this time it'd be her. It never was. Then I got the message. It wasn't even from her. It was from a mutual friend. A screenshot of her Instagram story. Lisa on a yacht laughing with Steven. The man she told me was toxic. The one she swore was part of her past. They were drinking champagne, their heads leaned close, her legs draped over his lap. The caption said, "Some people take a while to figure it out, but we're finally home." I stared at that photo for over an hour. Not because I couldn't believe it, but because I could. I remembered every time she brought up his name and insisted she didn't care. Every time she got defensive. Every time she went quiet when I asked about their past. I was just the fool who believed I could love her hard enough to erase someone else's shadow. I didn't cry. Not that night. Not the next day. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the heart monitor beep, like it was mocking me. When my parents came to visit, I told them I was fine. I even smiled. My mom could tell something was wrong, but she didn't push. She just held my hand and asked if I wanted her to bring homemade soup next time. I said sure. I couldn't taste anything anyway. One night, a nurse named Yuki sat beside my bed. She was young, soft-spoken. She'd been the one on shift the day I first came in. She said, "You know, I thought she'd be the type to stay. The way she looked at you when you came in. It was like she was terrified of losing you." I smiled bitterly. Turns out she was just scared of being stuck with me. Yuki didn't respond. She just looked at me for a while and said, "You deserve someone who wouldn't leave just because things got hard." I didn't believe that at the time. I thought maybe I was the problem. Maybe I got too sick, too soon. Maybe I wasn't enough to compete with Steven. But then Florence came into the picture. It happened by accident. She came by the hospital one day, looking for her father, who was being treated a few floors up. We bumped into each other near the vending machines. She glanced at me, paused, and then asked, "Aren't you George?" I nodded slowly, unsure. She smiled faintly. "You're Lisa's boyfriend, right? Or maybe ex-boyfriend now." I must have flinched because she sighed and looked away. "Yeah, I figured. I saw them last week. Steven was bragging to some friends about how he won her back. Disgusting." I hadn't said a word yet. Florence looked back at me and said, "You know, I was with Steven for 2 years. He cheated on me 3 times. Twice with girls I knew. The 3rd time with Lisa." My blood ran cold. She scoffed. "Don't look so shocked. Lisa's good at playing innocent. But trust me, she knew exactly what she was doing." I stared at her, feeling something shift in my chest. Not anger, not pain, just this eerie, quiet emptiness. Florence watched me for a moment, then said, "You look like hell, but somehow still better than him." She handed me a bottle of water and walked away. That was the first time someone saw me, not as a patient, not as a burden, not as the guy who got left behind, but just as a person, and from that moment, everything started to change. It started with silence. After that run-in with Florence, I couldn't get her words out of my head. She knew exactly what she was doing. Those 7 words echoed louder than any heartbeat monitor in my room. The more I thought about it, the more things started falling into place. The late replies, the sudden business trips, the way Lisa always turned off her phone at night, claiming she just needed me time before bed. I'd spent so long trying to be the understanding boyfriend, I didn't notice how she was already slipping away. A week passed, then another. I got discharged and went home to an apartment that still smelled like her perfume. Her toothbrush was gone. So were her things. She hadn't even left a note, just disappeared. I stared at the empty drawers, the untouched pillow on her side of the bed, and I realized she'd planned this. She didn't forget to come back. She chose not to. A few days later, Florence messaged me. Just a simple, "Hey, I didn't know why she reached out. Maybe she felt sorry for me. Maybe she just needed someone who understood what it felt like to be discarded like trash. Either way, I replied. We met up for coffee, then lunch. She had this no-nonsense energy about her, sarcastic, a little rough, but honest. And after weeks of being surrounded by pity and fake smiles, it was exactly what I needed. She didn't coddle me. When I told her everything, about the hospital, about Lisa, she just scoffed and said, "Sounds about right." I blinked. You're not even going to pretend to be shocked? Florence was the only thing keeping me sane. She didn't demand answers, didn't ask me to forget Lisa overnight. She just sat with me in silence on the days I couldn't speak, distracted me on the days I wanted to scream. She was calm where I was chaotic. She had already bled once, just like me. Maybe that's why her presence didn't feel like pressure. Still, I couldn't pretend I was fine. I'd look in the mirror and barely recognize myself. The bags under my eyes, the stiffness in my movements, the tightness in my chest that never really went away. I couldn't tell if it was the remnants of my illness or just my heart refusing to heal. The worst part? I missed someone who had proven they didn't deserve to be missed. One night, Florence and I were walking home when it started raining. No warning, just a sudden downpour. She laughed and pulled me under a nearby awning. Water dripping from her hair, her cheeks flushed. "You ever going to start smiling again?" she asked, not teasing, just curious. I looked at her. She wasn't Lisa. She didn't have that polished glow, the carefully curated life, the fake vulnerability. She was real, blunt, flawed, and warm in a way that didn't suffocate. I replied, "I don't know if I even remember how," she said. "Then I'll remind you." But even as she said it, part of me stayed frozen in the past. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lisa in that hospital room, except she wasn't really there. It was just the ghost of who I thought she was. I didn't want to admit it, but I still remembered how tightly she once held my hand. I still remembered how she'd whisper goodnight and kiss my forehead. I still remembered thinking I was the luckiest man alive. Those memories weren't just painful, they were addictive, like a drug I knew would kill me, but I couldn't stop reaching for it. Then the text started. Blocked numbers. Unknown IDs. Voicemails with shaky breathing and a soft voice saying my name, then hanging up. I knew it was her. Lisa. And I hated how my heart still reacted to the sound of her voice. Florence noticed. One night she caught me staring at my phone, unmoving. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "Is it her?" I nodded. "Do you want to talk to her?" "No," I answered too quickly. She didn't push. She just handed me a glass of water and changed the topic. But I knew she was hurting too, because she'd started to care. And the more she cared, the more I hated myself for not being able to give her what she deserved. Then Lisa showed up. Opened the door one evening, expecting a food delivery, and there she was, standing in the hallway like a ghost that had finally found its way back. She looked thinner, paler, eyes swollen like she hadn't slept in days. "George," she whispered. Didn't say a word. I couldn't. She reached for me, but I stepped back. "I'm sorry," she said, voice trembling. "I was scared. I didn't know how to handle it. Seeing you sick, so helpless. I panicked. Stephen was just a distraction. I thought I could run from everything. But all I did was lose you." I wanted to scream at her. Ask her where she had been when the nurses changed my IVs, when I couldn't walk to the bathroom on my own, when I sat staring at an empty doorway hoping she'd walk through it. Instead, I said, "You didn't just lose me. You left me." She tried to touch my arm. "I want to make it right." "You can't," her voice cracked. "George, I still love you." But love wasn't enough, not when she proved she could throw it away the moment things got hard. I shut the door in her face. That night, Florence held my hand as I sat silently on the couch. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. She already knew. My heart was at war with itself. one side clinging to what used to be, the other trying to reach for something new, something real. But I knew one thing for certain. I could never go back. The version of me that waited for Lisa in a hospital bed was gone, and whoever I was becoming now deserved better. It happened 3 days after Lisa showed up at my door. I hadn't spoken to her since. Florence stayed by my side most nights, even if we didn't say much. She'd just curl up on the couch with a book while I sat staring blankly at the TV. Her presence was quiet but grounding, like gravity for someone who'd been floating too long. I was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, I could breathe again. Then I got a call from my mother. She sounded hesitant. "George, honey, Lisa came by the house." I stood frozen in the kitchen, phone pressed to my ear. "She what?" She said she wanted to apologize, that she made a mistake. "Your father nearly threw her out, but I thought maybe you should know." I gritted my teeth. "Why didn't you tell her to leave?" I tried, but she said she just needed 5 minutes, said she still loves you, that she's willing to do anything to fix things. I let out a bitter laugh. Now she wants to fix things? My mom paused, then said something that hit me harder than I expected. "She looked broken, George. And I'm not saying you should forgive her, but I know how hard it is to stop loving someone even when they hurt you." I ended the call without replying. That same night, Florence was already at my place when I got home. She looked up from her book, smiled, and said, "Long day?" I didn't know how to respond. My brain was still swimming with thoughts of Lisa standing in my childhood living room, probably staring at the photo of us on the wall, the one my mom refused to take down. I sat down next to Florence and said quietly, "She went to see my parents." Her body stiffened slightly. "What?" "She told them she still loves me." Florence didn't speak right away. She just stared at the wall like she was trying to process something too heavy to lift. Finally, she asked, "And what do you want?" "I don't know," I said honestly. She nodded, then got up to grab a glass of water. But the way she moved, slower, more distant, told me everything I needed to know. I'd hurt her just by being uncertain. She didn't stay over that night. The next day, I didn't hear from her at all. Then came the real twist. That evening, as I was clearing out my email inbox, I opened a message from a name I didn't recognize. Florence L. Admin Greystone.edu. It was an old forwarded conversation, one between Florence and someone from a university abroad. The subject line, "Recommendation Letter for Graduate Fellowship." The email was from a month ago, before she and I got close, and the contents made my blood run cold. In it, Florence mentioned me by name. She wrote, "George and Lisa's breakup happened recently. It's made things awkward, but I still believe the situation could benefit my application. There's room to position myself favorably. I'll find a way to become part of his daily life without triggering suspicion." I couldn't breathe. I stared at the screen for a full minute before reading it again. And again. Everything she'd done, the late-night talks, the comforting smiles, the dinners, the silence when I couldn't speak. Was it all part of some plan? My chest tightened, harder than it had when I saw Lisa with Stephen. I called Florence. She answered after 2 rings, her voice quiet. "Hey." I didn't waste time. "Did you use me for your fellowship?" There was silence on the other end. "Florence?" She exhaled slowly. "Where did you see that?" I felt my throat close. "So it's true?" She didn't deny it. "It started that way," she said. "I won't lie. At first, yes. I thought being around you would give me an edge. Everyone knew about your breakup, the mess, the scandal. I figured if I could show stability, empathy, maybe I could stand out." My heart sank. "But then things changed," she continued, her voice cracking. "George, I didn't expect to care. I didn't expect you to mean something to me." I laughed bitterly. How convenient. I know how it sounds, but I never meant to hurt. I said nothing. I couldn't. My mind was spinning. I had been used twice, first by Lisa, then by the one person I thought might actually understand me. You don't have to believe me, she whispered, but what I feel for you now, it's real. I ended the call. Then I stared at the ceiling, remembering how she'd looked at me in the rain, how she said she'd remind me how to smile. All of it. Fake, half fake, somewhere in between, I didn't. No. All I knew was I was done being someone else's stepping stone. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was Florence standing at my door with takeout, laughing in the rain, sitting beside me, when no one else would. But now, every moment replayed like a scene from a movie I hadn't realized I was never supposed to be the lead in. Morning came slowly, dragging sunlight across the apartment like a lie. I didn't know what hurt more, Lisa abandoning me when I was sick or Florence being by my side with an ulterior motive. With Lisa, at least her betrayal had been loud, obvious, brutal. But Florence, she got under my skin, made me feel safe. And then pulled the rug out like it was never real to begin with. By noon, I knew I had to confront her in person. I drove straight to her workplace. She was walking out of the building just as I pulled up. Her expression shifted when she saw me. Relief. At first, then dread. She knew. I rolled down the window. Get in. She didn't hesitate. We drove in silence. Not to a cafe, not to a park. I took her to the place where I'd collapsed. That same bridge. The one Lisa had left me alone on while she ran off with Steven. I pulled over, got out, and leaned against the railing. Florence joined me, her arms crossed, wind pushing her hair back from her face. You brought me here to hurt me? She asked quietly. No, I said. I brought you here so you'd understand what this place means to me. The lowest moment of my life happened right here. And now, somehow, you're a part of it too. She didn't look away. George, I never meant for things to get this far. I thought I could control it, keep it professional. But I saw how broken you were, and I just couldn't fake it anymore. So what changed? I asked. At what point did I become more than just a boost to your academic resume? She looked like she wanted to cry but held it in. When I saw how you held in your pain, when I saw how even after everything Lisa did, you still refused to badmouth her, you still tried to protect her in your own way. That kind of kindness, it shook me. I turned to face her. But you still used me. Yes, she whispered, and I'll never forgive myself for that. Silence again. The wind howled over the bridge, rustling the trees in the distance. Everything felt raw. I opened up to you, I said, my voice cracking. I let you in when I had nothing left. I told you about nights I cried myself to sleep wondering why I wasn't enough. And you sat there, listening, knowing you were lying to me the whole time. I wasn't lying when I held your hand, she said. I wasn't lying when I told you that you deserved better. George, I fell for you, and it terrified me. I laughed hollowly. You fell for me while using me. How romantic. She stepped closer. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I just needed you to know that what I feel now, it's real. It didn't start that way, but it ended up being the most real thing I've ever felt in my life. I looked at her, trying to find some sign that she was lying again, but there was only exhaustion, regret, and something else. Something that felt like love, raw and bruised. Then she said something that nearly broke me. George, I pulled out of the fellowship. What? I withdrew my application. A week ago. Before you found that email. Before any of this blew up. I couldn't keep living with the guilt. I chose you. Even if you didn't choose me. The weight of her words knocked the breath out. Of me. She had already chosen. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Because I didn't think I deserved to. I was waiting for the right time, but maybe there never was one. I looked out at the water, watching the reflection of the sky. ripple on the surface. My mind was still chaos, but something inside me cracked open, just a little. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. Florence stood silently beside me, waiting. And then, like some twisted joke from the universe, my phone rang. Lisa. I picked it up, putting it on speaker before saying a word. George, she said, her voice shaky. I heard you met with Florence. You know everything now. Yeah, I wanted to warn you, but I figured, after what I did to you, I didn't have the right. I know you hate me. And maybe you should. But if you're going to give someone a second chance, give it to her. Florence stared at the phone, stunned. Lisa continued. She made a mistake. So did I. But she stayed, even when she didn't have to. That's more than I ever did. Then, she ended the call. Neither of us said anything for a while. Eventually, Florence asked, Do you believe her? I don't know, I admitted. I don't even know what to believe anymore. Florence turned to me, her voice low. Then let me prove it. Not with words, with actions. No more excuses, no more lies. If you never want to see me again, I'll disappear. But if there's even a sliver of space left in your heart, I'll wait. I looked at her, really looked, the girl who'd started off as a stranger, who broke my trust, then somehow pieced together the parts of me Lisa had left shattered. I thought of everything. How she sat with me in silence, let me rage without judgment, how she stayed when I had nothing but heartbreak to offer. She wasn't perfect. But maybe that's why this felt real. I stepped closer. She didn't move. I'm not ready to forget, I said. But maybe I'm ready to try. Her breath hitched. I'll take that, she whispered. I'll take every second of trying. She reached out, hesitant at first. I didn't pull away. Our hands met, not perfectly, not seamlessly, but with a trembling sincerity that said, We're broken, but we're still here. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like someone's leftover. I felt like someone worth fighting for. 6 months later, I stood in the same hospital hallway where I had once waited alone, counting ceiling tiles and holding my breath through the worst pain of my life. Only this time, I wasn't sick. I was waiting for someone else. Florence stepped out of the consultation room with a slight limp in her walk. She had twisted her ankle earlier in the week and still insisted on walking everywhere herself. She waved the report in her hand and grinned. Minor tear. I'll live. I took the paper from her, read it twice even though I trusted her words, then muttered, Next time, maybe don't try to race the elevator. She chuckled. Next time, maybe don't try to beat me to the car keys. It was a strange kind of peace we had built, quiet, a little chaotic, but honest. She had proven herself in every way words never could. She went back to school, but not abroad. She stayed in the city, balancing her classes and a part-time job she hated just to make things work on her own merit. And I rebuilt my career. My health, my self-worth, one brick at a time. But closure. I didn't realize I still needed it until Lisa came back into the picture, not as a girlfriend. Not even as a friend, but as the guest of honor at an alumni gala, one hosted by none other than Stephen's firm. They had just launched a joint business project with my company, and the board wanted me present. At first, I considered skipping the whole event. Florence encouraged me to go. Why avoid her? She said one night as we sat on the floor assembling furniture for our new apartment. You're not scared of the past anymore, right? I wasn't. But part of me still felt like seeing Lisa again might undo everything I'd rebuilt. Florence handed me a screw and added, Besides, if she sees what she gave up, maybe that's the real closure. So I went. I walked into that event with Florence on my arm, dressed in black satin with a slit high enough to turn heads. Not that she did it for attention, she just always wore what she liked. We made our way through the crowd, shaking hands with executives, smiling for photos. Then I saw her. Lisa, She hadn't changed much, still carefully composed, still hiding behind a mask of elegance. But when she saw me, the mask cracked. Her smile faltered, her eyes widened, and for a brief moment, she looked like someone who had seen a ghost she wasn't ready to face. Stephen noticed her reaction. He turned, and the moment he saw me, his smug grin dropped. I extended a hand. "Stephen," he hesitated before shaking it. "George, been a while." I nodded. "It has." Then I turned to Lisa. "You look well." She cleared her throat. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "Why not?" I said calmly. "It's my company too now, partnered just last month." Stephen looked visibly shaken. Lisa whispered, "You've done well for yourself." Florence stepped forward, holding her champagne with poise. "He always does. Some people just don't recognize gold until it's out of reach." The jab was soft-spoken, almost polite, but the meaning wasn't lost on anyone. Lisa smiled tightly. "You must be Florence." "I am." She reached out and shook Lisa's hand. "And you must be the woman who taught him how to survive alone." There was silence. Stephen tried to diffuse the tension. "We're all here to celebrate, right? Let's not dig up old wounds," I cut in. "Funny how they only start bleeding when truth enters the room." Lisa's voice shook. "I never meant to hurt you." "You didn't just hurt me," I said. "You abandoned me when I was at my worst. And then you ran to the man you used to call a joke." Stephen flinched. Lisa's voice cracked. "I made a mistake." "No," I said. "You made a choice, just like I made one tonight, to show up, not for revenge, but to say goodbye." Her lips parted, but no words came out. Florence looped her arm through mine. "We'll be going now." But I turned one last time. "Actually, one more thing." I pulled out a small envelope and handed it to Stephen. He opened it with a frown. His expression twisted as he read the contents. Legal paperwork. Transfer voids. Project redirection. "What is this?" he snapped. I smiled. "A revocation clause. Your firm violated partnership ethics when your senior partner pursued a personal relationship with a former partner of mine during a merger discussion. Conflict of interest. My company has full rights to pull the funding." Stephen paled. "You can't do that." I already did. Lisa looked like she might faint. I leaned in just enough to whisper to her, "You chose him when I had nothing. I chose me when I had everything." Then I walked away. Florence didn't say a word until we were outside, standing under the golden streetlights. "That," she said, "was way too hot." I laughed, not because of revenge, not because I had humiliated them, but because it was over. Really over. Months ago, I was the man waiting for someone to love me back. Now, I was the man who had learned to love himself and had someone beside him who didn't need to be begged to stay. As we got into the car, Florence asked, "Do you regret anything?" I thought about it, about Lisa, about being left in that hospital bed, about Florence's betrayal and her redemption. Then I looked at the woman who stuck around even after I stopped being easy to love, and I said, "No, not a thing, because everything that broke me led me to you." She smiled. "Good. Because I'm never letting you go." I reached over, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "You don't have to. You're already home." And for the first time in my life, I meant it, every single word.